Hi, and welcome to the Anti-Politica channel. I am Jovan Grahovec. I am Serbian American and also professor of strategic management, currently on a break due to the vaccine mandates that are still and unfortunately widespread across American universities. Today I want to talk about fascism, which is obviously a very important and it's also a very interesting topic. And I'm doing this in reaction to several videos and several articles that I saw recently that draw a straight line between nationalism and fascism, and then use that to argue that MAGA movement in America, Brexit in the UK, Rassemblement National in France, and similar political movements elsewhere, such as Fratelli d'Italia in Italy, and leaders like Viktor Orban in Hungary are fascists and present fascist threats to modern society. I want to argue the opposite and present an alternative view that starts with Mussolini's own definition of fascism as a merger between state and corporate power, and argue that nationalism is actually something that goes together with fascism often, but not necessarily, and that to present an alternative view of fascism which has some interesting implications for us moving forward and identifying maybe more real threats of fascism that we may be facing now and in the future. In order to do that, I made a nice little PowerPoint chart to connect these arguments, so I'll open that in a second and we'll go over it together. Just a second. So here we have a little chart in which this idea of fascism as a merger of state and corporate power is in the center, and we'll talk about how we may get there from other kinds of social systems, and then we'll talk about the hallmarks of fascism and how we may be able to recognize it when we see it. So as far as getting there, I believe that we can get to fascism from communist dictatorships and socialist systems, but I'm less interested in that this time. I'm interested in how we can get there from quote-unquote normal democratic capitalist systems. And the primary and obvious vehicle is that of corruption. Corruption being this two-sided coin in which state officials, whether in the legislature or the executive branch or even in the judicial system, may try to monetize their decision-making power. And the way you do that is basically you do favors to the richest and the most powerful, and corporations are one of the prime candidates. So politicians seeking monetary payoffs are one of the drivers of corruption that get us toward the state and corporate elites becoming closer and closer together, and eventually maybe completely intertwining with each other in a fascist system. The other side of the corruption coin is that of the corporations and businesses out there. They will definitely have strong interests in protecting their profits and property, and they will necessarily lobby the government. But over time, they may want to become greedy and want more and more favorable legislation, not just to protect their profits, but then to protect them from competition, whether foreign or innovators internally and so forth. So this, unless vigilant citizenry or something stops this process of corruption or keeps it in check, there's that danger of a slide toward more and more fascism and eventual merger of the state and corporate power. An interesting factor that may precipitate this transition to fascism could be some kind of economical, political, or other type of shock that causes social unrest or crisis. Social unrest may also arise if people become fed up with corruption. So that's an additional factor that may cause social unrest. But these big crises and social unrests, when the political and the business class may feel threatened, may actually precipitate this transition to fascism. And again, going back to Mussolini and the example of Italy, it's interesting how in the aftermath of the First World War and the communist revolution in Russia, there were a lot of revolutionary movements across Europe, lots of turmoil, lots of crises. And it's interesting that in 1921, workers of Fiat, the famous Italian car manufacturer, they took over Fiat's factories. So it's perhaps not that surprising that the Agnelli family, owners of the corporation, had some fascist sympathies, because they saw that as a way to fight back communists and protect their property and their profits. So these kinds of crises are always something to watch for, because that's when things become very, very volatile, and that may speed up the merger between state and corporate elites and the emergence of fascism. These unrests obviously can result in other kinds of moves, such as maybe toward communism, or maybe back toward more entrepreneurial, less corrupt type of capitalism, which is probably one of the fortunate aspects of the American Revolution, that resulted in more free markets rather than fascism. So fascism as a merger of state and corporate power, that kind of system is fundamentally illegitimate for large sections of society, large sections of the worker class, large sections of the professional class that are maybe not working for those corporations, but maybe in small and mid-sized businesses, will typically not like this type of arrangement. Moreover, it's very anti-democratic by definition. So large sections of society will not be pleased to be ruled by an oligarchy that results from a merger between the political class and the corporate class. So the natural response of the oligarchy will be crack down on individual and group rights and freedoms. So freedom of speech, freedom to organize, all kinds of freedoms will be under attack in these fascist systems, because in order for this system to sustain itself, it will have to crack down on opposition, and there will be opposition from farmers, from small businesses, from mid-sized businesses, from intellectuals, from the professional class, from workers, and so forth. So crack down on rights and freedoms is something that's really, really tightly linked to this idea of fascism. Moreover, there will be authoritarianism and hierarchy, in the sense that many players will find home inside this fascist system. Big corporations and the executive branch at the state level will be on top, but there will be players at local levels politically, and affiliated businesses that will support this fascist pyramid throughout the society. Another tool for these kinds of regimes to maintain legitimacy and maintain themselves in power is to stoke nationalism. That is, if you can create an external threat or a challenge, and if you can present your interests as the interests of the entire collective, and the nation is one kind of natural collective that we have in across countries, that will be a natural way to go. So in the case of Mussolini, he emphasized Italian nationalism. He wanted to extend Italy and reconquer some of the territories lost after the First World War. He wanted to conquer some colonies in Africa so that this state and corporate power can be exercised over a larger space, and so that this kind of oligarchy can appropriate more resources. And the other thing is that if you foster nationalism, you can label all opposition as being opposed to your own nation, and working to destroy the nation, being traitors and threats and so forth. So it's a natural way to maintain yourself and your legitimacy. However, this is not necessary. And for example, in Portugal under Salazar, we didn't really see that much nationalism. Salazar's and Portuguese oligarchy's tool was more religion and Catholicism, and maybe because Portugal had colonies going into the Second World War and didn't feel threatened by its neighbors, and it was difficult to mobilize on that level. It's interesting how in Portugal nationalism was not that extensively used. One important note here is that Nazism, the thing that we saw in Germany with Hitler and the awful regime over there, Nazism is a type of fascism, but not all fascism is a Nazism. So this analysis completely it kind of doesn't go into Nazism, because it's a uniquely vicious and somewhat different social system that we saw with Mussolini, which is classical fascism, and with Franco in Spain, with Salazar in Portugal, and you could argue that some Latin American regimes in the 70s assumed many of these fascist features. So when I talk about fascism, I'm talking about this kind of traditional notion of fascism, which is Mussolini-esque, and is separate from this idea of Nazism, which is a kind of fascism, but not all fascism is Nazism. So that's an important distinction to make. So this is the classical fascism that we saw in the 20th century, and it's interesting to consider our modern society, and I'll switch to another chart in a second. So how is our world today different from Italy in the 20s and 30s of the last century, and how might that change our analysis of fascism? Going back to the original idea of fascism being a merger of state and corporate power, we see that both sides of that coin have changed, and they have changed fundamentally. In Mussolini's time, most industries were dominated by one or two or a handful of local national corporations that were owned locally, and that's clearly no longer the case. In many industries today, we see just a handful of dominant global corporations, and especially in high-tech and IT, we see the emergence of just tremendously powerful corporations that wield influence around the world. If you follow French or Italian media, you will sometimes hear the term GAFAM, and that means Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. So there is even a convenient acronym to lump together all these corporations that have tremendous resources, that are tremendously rich, and what's also very important, they control information in some way. And that's an additional source of their global power. On the state side, we see the emergence of trading blocs, trading treaties, World Trade Organization, various supranational bodies such as World Health Organization, and superstates. European Union is an example of a superstate that is a merger of several states that decide to get together and transfer some of their sovereignty to this big new entity that takes over some of the regulatory and other roles. This has interesting implications for our analysis. In particular, we should be somewhat worried about corruption. Because if you think about the location and how and where and when these regulations are negotiated, it seems that the distance from you and I and our community and even our country and even our elected representatives and the place where these things are hammered out is increasing. On the other hand, if you think about these global corporations, they have tremendous resources, presence around the world, and you can bet that they have their representatives at the table when these new regulations are negotiated and put in place. So if anything, the control of corruption is becoming more difficult because the distance between citizens and where these deals are made is increasing, and on the other hand, corporations are becoming more powerful. They have global reach, they have tons of resources, they control information, and they can now reach out to these superstate representatives in ways that are less visible to us than was the merger between the Italian fascists and the Italian corporate elites than that was to Italians. So this is something that should worry us. And beyond that, we should look at these things that accompany fascism and try to recognize them. And it's important to know what to look for. Authoritarianism and hierarchy, definitely something to watch for. Crackdown on rights and individual freedoms, something to watch for and something that really worries me these days. If you think about all the censorship going on social platforms, carried out precisely by these big players, big corporate players that are now dominating cultural spaces, they're dominating information spaces, and they're feeling emboldened and powerful to censor you or to manipulate what you see when you log on to your computer. So this is something to watch for. Finally here, if this is going to be the story, if the new merger will be between global corporate power and increasingly superstate power rather than national power, then it would be surprising to see that this merger would peddle nationalism as its tool to maintain its legitimacy and power. If anything, they may be tempted to peddle and propagandize globalism as their ideology, and they may perceive nationalism as a threat, actually. So whereas a nationalism was something that was a tool of fascist elites to maintain their legitimacy and their hold on national state and power in that state, it could be that nationalism now has a completely different role and is actually anti-fascist if new fascism is going to be global in nature. Wokeism, there's some interesting thoughts here. Is wokeism being propagandized in some ways by these huge corporations? Because we do see that. Disney's of the world and various big corporations are peddling wokeism, and the question is, why are they doing that? Could that be related in some ways to possible emergence of a globalized fascism that may be the kind of threat that we are facing in our century, in contrast to the previous century. So these are some intriguing thoughts. The main proposition here is that those who are arguing that Brexit and MAGA are new forms of fascism, they could be barking up a wrong tree. It could be that the new fascism will be anti-nationalist and global in its nature, and the question is how we as citizens in the 21st century can kind of control this process of corruption and make sure that this kind of globalistic economy doesn't become fascist. I'm worried about the signs of fascism and crackdown on individual rights and freedoms and censorship on global social platforms. And I'm in this context, I'm worried about COVID fascism, which I call semi-facetiously, but also semi-seriously, this idea of vaccine passports as manifestations of this kind of a global fascism. And I'll close this slide in a second and switch to the regular camera. Bear with me. So it's interesting to think about all these vaccine requirements and vaccine passports now that we know that the vaccine doesn't stop transmission. So there is no public health justification for that whatsoever. The latest example we saw our President Joe Biden, who had multiple shots and still got COVID, and then he got it again. So there is no rational reason to impose this requirement on anybody, yet it persists. As I said earlier, many universities across the United States, especially in blue states, insist on this requirement, and many private universities in red states still impose this requirement on their staff and students. This requirement is also imposed on foreign travelers often because I guess they're an easy target. So you cannot enter the United States with a foreign passport unless you have a proof of vaccination. And Canada is probably even stricter. I think that they have even some internal travel requirements to be vaccinated if you want to get on the plane and so forth. Don't quote me on this, but for sure you cannot enter Canada unless you're vaccinated, and there are similar requirements in some other countries, and it just doesn't make sense. And then the question is, why is that so? And are pharma companies really that powerful to maintain this and keep it in the game for some devious reason or for their profit reason? I would suggest that this idea of a mandatory vaccination and this notion that you will need some kind of receipt or proof that you were vaccinated. In today's world, nobody's going to carry a paper receipt that they were vaccinated. You'll have it on your cell phone, especially if boosters will be necessary moving forward. Now, once that is the case, it becomes interesting for not just pharma companies that will definitely be interested in selling additional boosters and additional vaccines, but now Apple and Google, who control the space of your smartphone, they have the two dominant operating systems for your smartphone. Now they become central players in this arena, and moreover, they can extract information about what you did, where you did it, how, when, and so forth, and that will give them additional power. In addition to that, your phone companies will likely have a piece of this action in which you're being tracked, your checkpoints are being logged, and potentially if you fall ill, it may allow them to trace your contacts and so forth. So phone companies probably wouldn't mind if this idea took hold and people started to carry some sort of health passport on their smartphone with vaccine boosters duly registered and so forth. And the host of other companies, companies that are involved in the cloud, such as Amazon and Microsoft and others. So it seems one of those things where something that's violation of some people's rights, some people are against this, and there is no public health justification, and many people just don't want to be part of this game. This is being imposed on them with help of the state powers and governments around the world that are making your life difficult unless you have this. So it could be one of those ultimate fascist proposals. And it's not just Pfizer. There's a whole bunch of corporate players that would like to see this and see a space for them to increase their power and make additional money and enslave you as in this process. And it's interesting how information is being censored on social platforms and in various ways that's preventing people from protesting against this and organizing against this, even if it's completely benign and it just comes down to sharing information. They would like to keep us separated and to keep our heads down and not protest against this. But this could be one of the ultimate symptoms that there is this kind of move toward global fascism that I just talked about. So this is something to watch for, something to fight, and something that I will talk about in the case of our universities in one of the future videos. If you like this video, please feel free to share it and spread the word. Give it thumbs up. Please enter your comments below on YouTube and Rumble. That would be great, and I'll try to respond to as many as possible. And if you'd like to subscribe to this channel, that would be great as well, and that would probably increase the exposure of this video. So with that, thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.